Discontinuation syndrome is the industry term for what is a well-documented observation that patients struggle often in new and different ways clinically when they come off of a medication than they ever did before they went on medication. And we now understand, based on more recent literature, that discontinuation syndrome is an inappropriate term for what is a chemical withdrawal process.
Everyone I've talked to who have taken people off heroin and psychiatric drugs tell me it's much easier to stop heroin than to stop psychiatric drugs. It can be done quite quickly to stop heroin, but to stop a psychiatric drug, in the worst case, it can take years, and in some cases you will never succeed.
And do researchers know why this is?
We know much too little about what happens in the brain, and we can do well without that knowledge, because it's very clear to me, after having studied the science, that the way we use psychiatric drugs do vastly more harm than good. So we should use them very, very little, and mostly in highly acute situations for a few days. All these drugs are harmful when you take them for longer. There is a good deal of research on withdrawal symptoms. And in one study, for example, where people on antidepressant drugs were suddenly exposed to a placebo for 5 to 7 days without knowing when it happened, actually a third of the patients became quite seriously disturbed because of withdrawal symptoms, and about a third of them to such a degree that you could say that they got a new depression. But this is not a true depression. This is a withdrawal symptom. It is a withdrawal depression. I also need to say that this is because your brain has become accustomed to the antidepressant drug. You no longer have your normal brain. You have a new condition in your brain, and when you suddenly don't get the drug, you can become seriously ill. Withdrawal symptoms are unfortunately very often interpreted by doctors as disease symptoms. Also psychiatrists, who should know much better than this. And then they tell the patients, there you see, you can't be without your drug, we need to put you on it again. So then they can be on the drug forever, for the rest of their lives. So these drugs are so difficult to handle that not even many psychiatrists are able to handle them, because they misinterpret withdrawal symptoms for disease symptoms. I hear it all the time from patients.
Some people are just able to stop, and they don't even have the tiniest little bit of difficulty. Now there's other people within a day or two or a few days of stopping it, they develop a variety of different things, flu-like feelings, very vivid dreams, mood lability. They cry really easy and they laugh really easy.
Tearfulness, hopelessness, intensely dark mood, suicidality, even homicidality.
In the beginning it feels good, like, oh, I'm getting my emotions back. But after a while, it's a pain because it's uncontrolled emotionality.
Symptoms that are largely observed in my practice and not so much documented in the literature, like flares of autoimmune disorders and digestive problems, cessation of menstruation, for example, so essentially early menopause.
Electrical shock sensations around the scalp, And they call them zaps because they seem to have almost a sound-like feeling. It's like a tingling and maybe a little zap-like noise. A bzz. You can get withdrawal mania, withdrawal depression, withdrawal anxiety. There's a variety of things that you can get after stopping, and a lot of those go away in a week or two. Now there's another category of person who will develop symptoms 3 to 6 months out. They stop the drug. They may have some withdrawal when they stop it, or they may have nothing and do very well. But 3 or 6 months out, they develop a new set of symptoms than the ones that they were being treated for. So initially, I wasn't sure what to make of this. I said, well, you've done well, a couple of months have passed, but the 3 and 6 month set of symptoms was happening so often. It took me a long time, it took me years before I realized, oh, this is part of the toxicity of the drugs. And I realized that this is similar to what you think of from antipsychotic medications causing something called tardive, meaning late, dyskinesia, meaning movement disorder. So with tardive dyskinesia, it can show up while you're on the drug. Usually the drug blocks it, so when you take the drug away, you see it more clearly. Or it may occur months or even years later after taking the drug. So there's a precedent for this kind of adverse reaction happening with psychiatric drugs. Only this time it's not a movement disorder that occurs late. It's more like this intense feeling of anxiety and depression. It's been described as akathisia. It's spelled A-K-A-T-H-I-S-I-A. Akathisia is a movement disorder where you feel like you need to move, but when you do move, it doesn't take away the urge to move. It's very uncomfortable, it's very restless, there's a lot of suicide from it. It's really a very debilitating symptom. Sometimes you can see the person getting up and pacing, but not always. Sometimes it'll go away if you reinstate the drug. Sometimes reinstating the drug makes them another notch worse. Sometimes you can find a similar drug that will help. Sometimes each time you try one of those drugs, you're making them one notch worse, and that seems to persist for years. I've been able to follow some people and see that that's gone away after, I don't know, 5 or 6 years, largely gone away, but not completely.
What do you hypothesize is the cause of this? Is it neurological damage that takes a long time to repair?
Yeah, it has to be neurological damage that takes a long time to repair. Nerve toxicity takes 5 to 7 years to repair itself, even if it's from a solvent or something. It looks like it's following that kind of trajectory. But this is sort of not well described by anyone yet.
It's not true that there's little information about withdrawal. I even used to believe there was little information because I looked kind of selectively. I didn't see too much. But there's a lot of information. There are consensus statements. There are tons of articles that detail. There are hundreds and thousands of case studies that detail what happens to patients who unwittingly or guided by a clinician come off their drugs. Sometimes it's terrible, sometimes it's horrible, sometimes people die, depending on the drug. Sometimes they're paralyzed. Sometimes the clinicians wonder what happened until they realize, my God, they were on this drug and before their surgery they stopped the drug. That's what explains all we're seeing, all these symptoms, physical symptoms, emotional symptoms, neurological symptoms, dermatological symptoms, everything, and they wonder what is going on, and it's due to withdrawal. When you put it all together and you take time and you reflect and you take the history and you see, oh my goodness, and we had no idea. No one told us. So we have thousands of these case studies. And we have hundreds of studies where patients are yanked off their drugs. Drug company, pharmaceutical company sponsored studies, clinical trials published in the best journals, where patients come into a trial and they're yanked off their drug at the beginning, and then they're put back on another drug, and then they're yanked off that drug again. And then we look at which group is doing better, the ones that are yanked off their drug or the ones who just stayed on their drugs. And you know what? The ones that stayed on their drugs seem to be doing better. And we have hundreds of those studies. Those are withdrawal studies. They're all there for all to see.
In my experience, quite few psychiatrists know how to get people off psychiatric drugs. We have in my country, for example, an official guideline that says that if you are on an antidepressant drug and you want to come off it, you can halve the dose abruptly. That is far too quick. Sometimes people just take off 10% of the dose, and then after a couple of weeks they try to take off another 10%, little by little, and then they watch what is happening. So to suddenly halve the dose, that's too much too quickly. This is our official guideline in Denmark.
It's probably best to do it gradually, but it's not always best. It's likely you're going to have a bad withdrawal if you do it suddenly, but it's not always likely.
And this process, by the way, can take years, which is an amazing detail, isn't it? You know, that there's not a chemical on the planet, to my knowledge, that can require years to taper off of. Not OxyContin, not crack cocaine, not heroin, and not alcohol. But psychiatric medications, any tapered patient will tell you, can take sometimes, years, if possible at all.
As judged from the many patients I am in contact with, not very many psychiatrists know how to do this. And I must also say that the scientific literature is very, very meager on this subject. Why have the psychiatrists not done randomized trials where they compare one method of tapering with another method of tapering so that we can know better how to do it? They haven't done these trials.
But who would fund that trial? And isn't that one of the problems?
You can fund trials that have a good purpose. We have enough public money that you can fund such trials. And in the worst case, if you cannot find funding for them, you can do trials without funding. If you really want to help your patients, you can do trials without funding. I have done that.
Just do it on your own patients.
Well, with colleagues
Yeah.
who are also idealistic and have not forgotten why they became doctors.